Hello, this is Josh Repka with Enviro Pest Solutions in Waterloo, Iowa, and you're listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, The Pest Geek, with Frank Hernandez.
We're going to be discussing fly prevention, all on this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. Hey, we're going to be discussing fly prevention. That's right, fly prevention. And how do you get those insects from coming in the first place? But before I do that, I want to remind everybody to join the Pest Geek Society. Join us on Facebook, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. We got a great mention. I want to thank Pete Chopin of Chopin Pest for featuring us on this month's issue of PMP Magazine as a Facebook group. Thank you for that, Pete. We really, really do appreciate that. And so join the society, pestgeekpodcast.com, and on YouTube. Check us out. We're putting out some new videos there. Also reminding everybody that on Wednesdays, we've got Nick on the Pest Life. Go ahead and tune into that on Wednesdays. And, tune in every day. We got some new stuff coming your way that we're going to be doing. And it's been a little bit of a challenge, more than I thought it would be to do what I do. But, hey, I shoot big because that's what I do. You go big or you go home. And you know what? I rather succeed at trying big and failing at a couple of things than not trying it at all. So we're definitely going full speed ahead. This is blowing up like you would not believe. And, it's kind of like flies on, well, you know what. So, hey, join us. And now I want to hand it off to Jeff. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Frank. This is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And I just saw the memo that Frank sent me regarding a question from Clint Mullins. And Clint, it looks what you wanted to find out about was flies. Well, that is a vast subject and certainly one that I've seen discussed in many hours of presentations and meetings over the years. And it seems like you had the question because you would come back from some type of a fly account with a dietary kitchen, and maybe you saw some issues, that some things that didn't seem right. But when you're dealing with flies, it all starts out outside the structure. Because the reality is, if we've got fly machines in there, we already know there's been a failure in process. Because the reason we have flies is because we have allowed them through some practice or processes that we've been conducting to get inside in the first place. That means the building or the site has penetration issues or control of penetration issues that aren't being taken care of on a regular basis. Well, let's take a look first of all at the outside of the building. And when I used to approach structures, when I was doing a lot more field audits, we would look for things that were different on the outside that might prove to be more attractive to flies. For sake of example, you're looking at the outside of a large retail store, a grocery or something along those lines, possibly a superstore of some type, and the entire front of the building is a uniform, pleasing color to the eye. Well, then wait a minute. You come to the doors, and you know what? They're different, and maybe they reflect light differently, but for some reason, that attracts the flies from a distance, and that's always seemed to be an issue. Now, as we get close to those doors, because that's the way people are getting in and out of the structure, well, wait a minute. Aren't there always trash cans deposited in that area? And that makes it convenient for people to throw things away. They won't make a mess. So you know what? Those trash cans become resource sites for flies right up near the entrances to the structure. And, that's a problem. because we've got things going on there, and as the doors open and close, the flies have the opportunity to get inside. And you may say, wait a minute, they've got fly air curtains at the doors. They can't possibly be getting in that way. Yeah, they can. And one way that we used to do assessments on sites, and I would actually take little pieces of toilet tissue in my pocket and ball them up, and I'd walk toward those front doors, and when I got in the range of those air curtains, I'd toss that little piece of paper on the ground. And you know what? Sometimes they'd buff it around and shoot right inside the structure because the air curtain just wasn't adjusted properly. And nobody was really paying attention to that. In fact, it might just be dirty where the fans are, and it isn't blowing properly. So it's creating air currents near those doors that are vacuuming the flies into the building. So that's a penetration issue that we have to deal with. So the fly machines on the inside are no big deal if we don't have the penetration issue in the first place. So those front doors can be a problem. Another issue around the front of buildings is where we have what's called pressure walls. And I think you might find those most commonly, around some of the large supercenter type stores we have throughout the United States. And what happens there is you have a grid that you walk over the top of as you're going in, and there's a matching vent system or grid above. So in other words, it's a funnel where people go into the building, and that's called a pressure wall because you've got a constant air current there that we might not notice, but it'll keep small insects out. It works great. Normally there's some type of a fan system or blower system right adjacent to that in a room, a storeroom. And they have filters in there that have to be kept clean, or else the air currents aren't going to be conducted properly. But what happens is that some well-meaning employee will park a buggy or a cart or even put a sign right on top of that pressure wall. Well, then they put a hole in it. And so the flies can come right through there, and that little bit of penetration area is enough to push flies right into the front of the building and create an issue. So you've got two things going on. The possibility of the fly fans, the air doors not working properly, and the pressure walls not being taken care of properly. The other thing, most American retail stores, the larger ones, groceries included, will have some type of a cart tunnel right near the front of the building for the shopping carts. Now, one of the things that I've noticed happening with those over the years, that penetration coming into the building is not real tall. It's only slightly taller than the shopping carts, and the average person has to duck down to go into that cart tunnel and then come into the building where the shopping carts are stored, and then they're pushed out for the customers coming in at the opposite side. They generally have air curtains on them. But one of the problems I've found with those is well-meaning employees will turn off the air curtains because they think they're cart dryers for a rainy day, and why are they running on a sunny, nice day? That's an issue because we're going to have flies penetrating there, and also the flies will hitch a ride in on the shopping carts themselves, and in some cases be out of the airflow on a side of the cart where it doesn't hit them even when it's on, and they're loaded right into the building, and now they have free access to everything once they're inside that cart tunnel. And unfortunately, in many cases, right outside that cart tunnel, you're going to have the employee smoking area because they're not allowed to smoke inside the building. And if you've inspected or assessed any number of these so-called smoking employee lounge areas outside, you'll know that, let's just say, maintenance and sanitation kind of take a vacation when the folks are relaxing in that area, having a pleasing smoke. So those areas build up with flies adjacent to the cart tunnels, and then that's another serious penetration problem. The other thing that can happen at the front of those buildings is when customers themselves are bringing the flies in with the shopping carts because they push them right through the front door. They pick them up in the parking lot, avoiding the cart tunnel. So there's a lot of penetration issues you have to pay attention to with regards to flies. The other thing you have to look at is not only that front entrance, what goes around behind the building. And when I'm doing outside assessments, I'm always looking for that little rock or stick or piece of wood that somebody might be using to prop the door open. And when they prop the door open to make a quick escape for a smoke, that's a constant access point for flies. The other thing that'll happen is if the store gets a lot of deliveries or the business gets a lot of deliveries, they may leave back doors open all day long and simply have plastic strips hanging there, which are never hung to a point where they're going to control flies to any degree, and the insects enter the back. The other thing that'll happen with entry like that is you create a difference because you put awnings over that back entrance area so employees have cover out of the rain or the sun or what have you for loading and unloading. And that dark, different space at the back attracts flies as well, particularly in the summertime when it's hot. Because when it's hot outside, those flies are looking for a cool, shady place. And they go right to that dark, cool, shady place. The back door is open anyway, and boom, in they come. Now, once they penetrate the back room of a lot of businesses, they may be milling around in there, and all of a sudden they notice there's light coming into the back room, and that's through the doors that connect the back room to the main portion of the business where clients are out front. Grocery is a perfect example of this. And I've seen situations where the sunlight reflecting through the front doors acts as a giant fly magnet and pulls them all away from the back of the building up to the front. And when they come in the front, what do they hit when they get up that way? They get delightful odors and smells coming out of the bakery areas and the produce departments and everything else up front where things are made attractive to entering customers. It's just as attractive for flies as well. So they're penetrating from the back and making their way to the front of the building. It's odd how these things happen, but it's what you have to look for with regards to flies. Another situation we had years ago was a building that had skylights in the front over the top of their produce and floral areas. Well, those skylights up front were letting sunbeams down into the building that hit the top of the display cases where some of the produce and flowers were displayed. It warmed them up a little bit. So the flies coming in there were attracted to those areas because their body temperature was more convenient for them, more pleasant for them, sitting on those warmed wood surfaces warmed by the sunbeams from above. So you have to pay attention to the environments that we're creating inside the building that really attract the flies in the first place. I've even seen situations where flies are getting into places that people say, well, it's too cool for them here. And yet we're having flies showing up in packaged meat. I saw this happen where flies were attracted near a production area. Fly machines were placed into that area with the mistaken idea they were going to deal with the flies, but what was actually happening, the flies were coming into that cool production area, attracted by the fly machines improperly placed, and then what was happening, they were landing on the stainless steel counters and stuff. Their body temperature dropped just enough, they didn't fly. So at that point, they were walking around and they were walking right into the wrapping systems they were using for the meat and getting wrapped into the packages. So you just never know quite what's going to happen with flies. Now, there are a lot of different species, and I saw that in your posting that you wanted to talk about species a little bit. And that's really an entomological question. If you can get samples of the insects, you can certainly identify them by keying them out. That's not that tough to do. And if it's for some reason something you don't feel comfortable with, I've been told many, many times there are a whole bunch of entomologists out there that can't wait to identify something. And we need that skill set in this industry every single day because that provides us focus and provides us a true target. Because it is important you know what kind of fly that you're dealing with. I remember a situation, we got a call from a client that was overrun with flies. They talked about tens of thousands of them. It was a horrible description on the phone. So we went ahead and visited the location. Now, you would think, how did they get this many houseflies? They weren't houseflies. They were dump flies. And you can go online and look up some very good articles on dump flies. But the dump flies are actually a biocontrol agent in agriculture for houseflies, because the dump fly larva will go through housefly larva like a shark after a raw piece of meat. And so what was happening was there were adjacent farms, and those farms are raising livestock, and they had manure pits. They had dump flies in the manure pits to control the housefly larva. Well, what was happening, thanks to the prevailing winds, those flies were ending up at the adjacent retail locations in huge numbers. They were entering the building, and the fly traps were picking them up like crazy. I mean, they were filling the glue boards in just a couple of hours, and they had to keep changing them. And they were screaming to their pest control operator, help, help, what are we going to do? But the actual issue was the farming areas surrounding it. And there wasn't a lot you could do except barrier systems with air currents, and that's eventually what they found to control the problem, was directing airflow in the areas of those entrances to keep the doggone things from entering the building, and it worked. We had a fly situation at one point in a very nice restaurant in a southern city, and when I went out and looked at it, the penetration point was actually the front door. And no manner of fly machines were going to handle this properly, and part of it was because the machines were, frankly, rather unattractive to the business owner. But we solved that fly problem with a very nice decorative pedestal fan directed blowing at the front door, which matched the decor of the business just perfectly. So when you entered, there was a pleasant breeze. That was enough to eliminate the fly problem in that zone. It's not just fly machines. Sometimes it's just a matter of preventing them from getting in the first place. And frankly, for flies, that really is the issue. How do we prevent them from getting in? Where are they really coming from? And you have to check this carefully. I've had fly situations where we were getting house flies in commercial kitchen areas that were actually coming in from the roof because they were attracted to the roof areas because of food debris and such dropped by gulls. So you never know where the problem is going to come from, and you really have to look at all the angles involved. Now, when it comes to the placement of the fly machines, it's not really that tricky. For the most part, we're always told 3 to 5 feet off the floor on the wall. Now, a lot of that placement information really came to us in the early 1990s when it was published a lot with regard to the vector fly machines from Johnson Wax when they came out with those. And that's a glue board machine. It was one of the first glue board fly machines that we had. And the installation was always told to everybody 3 to 5 feet off the floor. Well, the reality is, when you really took this to the field and we started working with it, one thing that we found was that fly machines placed on the floor were incredibly effective, because the flies would enter a production area and be moving throughout that zone. And the normal fly pattern, when you really made the observations, was counter height and below, because that's where the air currents were dead. That's where there was less airflow. So the flies always found those zones. It was easier for them to move around and feed. So we took those same exact machines and put them on the floor. And if you've ever looked at one of the old original vector fly machines, they were designed to stand up by themselves. So somebody had figured this out, that floor placement really worked well for those. And in today's world, in today's market, the best example of a floor-mounted machine absolutely is a Gardner 360. And that machine has 4 gigantic bulbs in it. It's got 3 gigantic glue boards, and it may as well be a vacuum when it comes to bringing in flies. Now, I saw another question on your posting with regards to how often you change the bulbs. There is all types of information out there about that. There's even some testing done by universities that said even old bulbs do really, really well at attracting flies. And that may well be the case. However, you also have to pay attention to the guidance provided by your customer and what their requirements are. One thing that we did many years ago was in high fly population zones, we changed the lights every 6 months. And in doing that, everyone seemed to be happier with the success rates of the machines. Maybe part of that was anecdotal, but you know what? It did work better. Whenever we changed them every 6 months, we got happier clients, if you will, than if we changed them once a year. Now, the other thing that may be effective with fly control with regard to the machines is the idea of a fly machine with a rheostat that periodically turns off the bulbs. In other words, the machine goes dark. And then maybe an hour later, it pops back on. There's some thought being that the flies are more attracted because instead of that light being constantly there in the department and kind of blending into the background, it functions more to say, hey, it's now an open window, and maybe the flies will go in that direction. There has been a little bit of work done that way, and I think in the future we may find that we have machines that have that feature. With regards to color, in my experience, the regular blue, black light fly bulbs that we've always seen seem to be just fine. I know there's some other color combinations out there, and some companies offer those. But with fly machines, for me, it has always been more a matter of placement in an effective area to draw the insects in, which is why I mentioned the floor-mounted machines. So it's definitely something to try. The other thing you have to be careful of with those fly machines is they're kept clean. Because if they're not kept clean and they get filthy, they're just going to look bad and your client's going to be very, very disappointed. Now, with regards to the glue boards going into the machines, you can get black and you can get white. In laboratory testing, black and white glue boards, frankly, are pretty close to the same catch rate. However, a number of years ago, we actually did field testing on black and white glue boards in grocery stores. And we got a ton of data on this, and this is going back probably 15, 18 years ago. But what we found in the field was that the white glue boards in the machines outcaught the black ones by a huge margin. And this was consistent. Program after test after program after test that we set up, the white glue boards always outcaught the black. Now, the reason for those black glue boards was obviously customers of the business could not see the flies as well. But the reality we found in the field was that the white ones absolutely outcaught the black ones. And that's why in many cases on those floor-mounted machines, we're always going to use white boards in there because you get a higher catch rate. Now, there's also a lot of work done with regards to the glue. There's dry glues, there's wet sticky glues, and that's a matter of your personal preference as a PMP as to what you want to put in your machines. Keep in mind, you want a board you can manipulate in and out of the machine so it won't flop around and get stuck to the bulbs. That's a serious problem. So you want a fly machine that's designed to get the boards in and out of easily. But bottom line, if you've got fly machines, you've got a penetration issue. You've got to identify the penetration issue so your catch rates in the machines are as close to zero as possible. And some companies do require you to take counts of what's in the machine. Now here, you're going to need some entomological help to properly identify what those targets are that you've caught. But the information can be valuable because you may find out there's a whole bunch of night flying insects in there, but you've got the machine in a secure area. So you got to question, how did these insects get in here if the building is supposed to be locked up tight at night? Well, I've got somebody propping the door open, more than likely. But fly work, fly machines, and placement is a detailed subject. And the deeper you get into it, it can get more and more confusing. So hopefully I've given you a few hints, some places that you can go to. And for heaven's sakes, Clint, get back to us and let us know if you want us to probe into some more detail on this, because I've danced through this subject and touched on a lot of different areas, and I know I've done it quickly. And so with that, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And Frank, I'll turn it back to you.
Jeff, thank you so much for that. We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I will see you again tomorrow. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.